Pauline and I hardly get to see each other because she lives very far from me and I live very far from her, but it's a delight when we do. So, Pauline, start by telling people where you live, and then I'll tell people how I got to know you.
Okay. Well, I live on the island of North Uist, and for those of you who don't, in the Outer Hebrides, for those of you who aren't sure where it is, if you imagine that I was the British Isles, the whole of me, and the top half is Scotland, and this is the island of Skye, then I'm 30 miles out in the Atlantic, a long chain of islands, and I live on the island called North Uist.
And
so that's where I am.
There's not that many people around you, I imagine.
I think there are about 1,200, I think, on our island.
Okay. And
yes.
you live alone in your house?
I do now.
And
I was with my husband until last January, but he died. And so, yes, I'm living alone. But I have one of my sons and his wife and 2 young grandchildren living literally across the single track road.
So are you in a bubble with them?
No, I'm not, because my son's working and the children are at school.
Okay.
So, but so far, we've had very, very few cases of COVID.
Okay. Well, there's our topical introduction, and now I'll go back into history and tell you how I got to know Pauline. It's quite amazing, actually. When I was teaching in adult education, I went to a conference in Coventry, and I remember very vividly, I was browsing around at the bookstall at lunchtime, and there were all these really worthy books about education, and then there was a little collection of poetry called Waiting Women. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What's that doing here? And I picked it up and I flipped it open and I started laughing. It was just like this, somebody was speaking to me and saying ordinary things about what women's lives are like. And it was so on the spot, I just started laughing. So I bought it and read it in the train coming home and gave it to my daughter who loved it. And that was the last I heard of Pauline Prior-Pitt for about 30 years. As far as I was concerned, it was a one-off. And then when my book, Uncertain Light, my novel, was published, a friend gave it to a friend who gave it to Pauline. And the friend of the friend emailed me and said, Pauline says it's her book of the year. And I said, who? Pauline Prior-Pitt. There cannot be 2 people with that name in the world. So we got back in touch and I discovered she'd written 6-7 volumes of poetry. And I'm her fan and she's my fan, so what could be nicer? Pauline, would you like to say something about that, Pauline?
Well, yes, it was quite an amazing thing to happen. A friend just came in who has an independent bookshop and who I'll be mentioning later on. And she just said, you might enjoy this book. It's just been given to me by a friend. She always brings me a book. And it was Uncertain Light. And I read it and absolutely loved it. I've read it twice and I will read it again, I know. And it was wonderful when Marion got in touch with this connection and the fact that she'd had this book of poems all those years, 30 years ago. And then eventually we met at Wenlock.
With the Poetry Festival at Wenlock.
At the Poetry Festival at Wenlock. Yeah. And it was Marion who persuaded me to put all my women's poems together. And I'll talk about that a bit later, I think. So
I'm very proud of that. Pauline's
yes.
written a lot of other poems, not just, but she's brilliant at poems about women. And this is the one that she put together because I pushed her, which is the one which gives the title to our talk tonight. Be an Angel, which I think is a brilliant title. I mean, that's what women are always being asked to be, aren't they?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit in history, Pauline. Have you always written poems?
No, I haven't. I didn't begin writing till I was about 38, but I'd always been a verse speaker. I was one of those precocious girls. I lived in Hull and used to go in for the Hull Musical Festival every year and win the verse speaking prize. And then I trained as an actress and a drama teacher. But then I married almost straight away after I left college, which I think was probably a mistake, although I was married for 58 years to the same person. And after college, moved with my husband, Robert, to Coventry, where he was the director of drama at the newly consecrated Coventry Cathedral. And so I did do some acting for him, played the part of the Virgin Mary in the Coventry Misty plays.
As a married woman, that's really...
As a married woman, yes.
Yeah.
Played Cordelia to his King Lear. And I worked in a school teaching drama and putting on plays and things for them. And then I had our first child, Paul, and that was lovely. And I know some of you will be horrified when I come up with the next thing. The following year, Paul was just 1 year and 2 weeks when I gave birth to undiagnosed twins. So I had 3 children under a year and a fortnight. So that really put paid to me doing anything else really but looking after them. And of course, in those days, women did give up work and bring up their families until they went to school. When the children were old enough to go to school, I didn't go back to drama because you need to be in the school after school for after school clubs, you need to be there for rehearsals, for putting on plays. And it just didn't tie in with being a mother of 3 small children. So I drifted into special needs and found I really enjoyed that, and went off to Birmingham University and did an advanced degree in special education and also in dyslexia. And then I worked for the Coventry Education Authority as a teacher advisor for special needs. I had 30 primary schools to look after to make sure the children in those schools were having their special needs met. It was special needs in mainstream schools, and running all the in-service training courses on special needs and dyslexia in Coventry and also at Warwick University. So that was my background.
What you were doing. You weren't writing poetry. Yes.
And that's what I was doing when I wasn't writing poetry, yes.
Well, what made you start writing poetry? And when did that happen in among the twins and your son?
Well, it was when I was about 38, and I suppose I was approaching 40. The children were teenagers. I think, looking back on it, I might have been a bit depressed. I don't know, but I began to write, and I, at the time, had just finished reading, probably for the second time, a book by André Gide called Straight is the Gate. And I've written this down so that I don't make a mistake when I quote him. The things she makes her happiness out of nowadays are so different from the things she had dreamed of, the things on which it seemed her happiness ought to have depended. Because I thought my happiness was going to depend on me being Judi Dench. Because that wasn't possible.
How long did you think that, Pauline? For how many years did you think that?
Well, obviously I had given up thinking that. But that was what it was. And I just found myself from this rather low position, even though I loved the job I was doing, I just found myself writing. Of course, I knew about verse forms from my drama days. I knew, all about what made a poem. So I just started writing about my situation, and the domestic scene, which wasn't really what normally poetry seemed to have been written about. Poetry for me at that point was written by white men, often dead. But a few women poets were coming onto the scene, like Carol Ann Duffy. And one day I was listening to Woman's Hour, and I heard the poet Evan Boland, an Irish poet who actually sadly died this year, but has just won the Costa posthumously. And the night feed, about feeding her baby in the night. And I thought, it is okay to write about the domestic scene. It's fine. I should say perhaps at this point that I wrote in secret, and I wrote in secret for 7 years. I
For
didn't
7
tell
years. Actually, that's a headline. I think we should hear that one again.
Yes.
Was that because you felt you couldn't be free to say what you wanted to say if anybody else was going to see it?
Yes, very much so. It was very feminist, very quite anti-men in many ways, because I suppose I felt, you know, Robert had trained to be an actor and I had trained to be an actor. He had carried on in the theatre world, which I loved, and I had had to adapt my life to be a mother, as women do. So the poems weren't very complimentary, but one night after we'd both had far too much to drink, I read them to him.
How was he?
I was very scared. I was very scared. He was marvelous, actually. He really was. He said, "I think these poems are really good, and why don't you join a writing group? Find a writing group and join a writing group." So,
hats off to Robert.
Pardon?
Hats off to Robert.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
I want to interrupt for one moment to tell you something about one of your poems and my Robert. My husband is called Robert as well. So Pauline has a wonderful poem about who replaces the toilet roll when it's finished. Have you got it to hand, Pauline? Can you
I don't think I have.
Isn't it called Actually?
It's called Actually.
It actually isn't really a poem word.
That's right.
Yes, but then it ends up by saying, but actually, who puts the new toilet roll on
its holder?
It's always the woman. And I read that, and in our house, it's always Robert.
Good.
So I felt quite caught out when I read that. In every other household in the world, apparently, it's always the woman who puts on the toilet roll. In our house, it's always Robert. Anyway.
Lovely.
That was kind of the spirit of the poems that I loved, is that they were pointing out these when I say past tense, they're still there, but when I first saw them, they were putting their finger on these tiny little ordinary domestic things which 90% of women could identify with, but that Pauline did them in this light way, which wasn't, you've said it was anti-men, Pauline. I think it was pointing out the inequalities. I never felt they were anti-men.
No, and I think men didn't either. I often had men would come up after a reading and say, "Oh, these poems are all about me as well."
Yes. I think you have a wonderful way of being loving at the same time that you're actually putting your finger on something that everybody needs to shout about. Anyway, go on. I've interrupted you. We're back to you've just emerged from your 7 years of secrecy.
Yes.
And then what happened?
You were going to ask me about waiting women, I think.
Yes. Well, how did you get from, first you said Robert said join a writing group, so how did you get from there to actually producing a collection? Right.
Well, I did join a writing group, and I can remember distinctly the first night I went there, even though I was trained as an actress, and so I shouldn't have felt like this, but suddenly I'm reading my own words, and I was very frightened. But in fact, they were very kind, and I'd go along each week and we'd share what we'd written, and that it sort of encouraged me. And then we started giving just little readings, sort of on the edge of fringe of festivals and things like that, and at the Belgrade and at the cathedral. And people would come up and ask me, could I have a copy of that poem about so-and-so? And I would just give it to them and say, yes, absolutely fine. Just take it. And just at that point also, I joined a women's studies course at Warwick University. And that gave me more courage, I think, about what I was writing about, finding on this women's studies course that a lot of what I was writing about was included in the lectures that I was listening to. And then a friend who had a small publishing company called Spike Press, and who used to come to my readings, who lived in the same street as me, said, why don't I publish your books? It seems silly to keep giving poems away. Why don't you get them into a book? And so Waiting Women was published by Spike Press. We just had 200 made, and I don't know quite how, but they sold very quickly. And my lecturer at the university said, I think you should send this book to Woman's Hour. And I said, they won't be interested. And he said, I just think, you know, why not? Just send it. So I sent it, and they were interested, and they interviewed me. I felt very uncomfortable. I felt unprepared. I felt that I didn't know really how to talk about my poetry at that point. You know, it was still too new and raw. I hadn't got the language for it. But anyway, it was fine. But of course, these days, people would have afterwards have been able to look you up on Google and find you on the website, send you emails. But I did get 50 letters as a result of that, for people wanting books. But I'd sold all the books, and I'd actually given thinking that was that, and I'd given the proceeds to the Coventry Women's Shelter. And so had to set to and get some more published. So, but that was the beginning. That was the first, you know, the beginning of it all.
What year was that, Pauline?
That was 1987. That was.
Well, I'm going to tell you another thing that we've just discovered that we have in common. In 1987, my first collection of short stories was published, A Language in Common. And for the only time in my life, I was interviewed on Women's Hour about it. It was about English classes for Asian women at the time. Was it Jenny Murray who interviewed you?
No, I can't even think of the name of the woman who interviewed me now. I mean, you can tell how naive I was. I didn't even ask for any time off from work. I arranged for her to come to my house in my lunch hour.
But I absolutely, I felt exactly the same way you did. It was sort of like this was another planet, and suddenly I'd landed on it by mistake, and it was a complete shock to me that my stories had been published anyway. But you know, it was so we were there at that same moment. How nice.
Yeah.
So from one collection, which is now beginning to get known a little bit. Tell us about the next stage, because by the time you and I connected, you were a seasoned performer at literary festivals with your poetry.
Yes.
So what was the journey from one book that you were private about to that?
Well, in 1990, we moved about 10 miles down the road to Warwick, to live in Warwick. And Warwick has a lovely festival. It was a mostly classical music festival, and with no poetry or anything. And so I just plucked up the courage and went to see the director and said, would you like to have a poetry reading in your festival? I'll share the takings with you for my fee. And he said, okay, let's do that. And much to my surprise, you know, it sold out, because I had no idea. You don't know what, once you've got a book, you don't know where it's gone. You don't know who knows you. And I'd started to be invited to read to women's groups and libraries. And then, and also a friend had been, a male friend, had been going to give an after dinner speech to a big WI dinner. And he didn't really want to go. And he said, why don't you go? Why don't you go? And I said, oh, do you think you could do poetry as as an after dinner speech? And he said, I'm sure you could. Go on, you'll be fine. So I went, and I really enjoyed it, and it worked really well. And then at work, which you know, I did love, and I used to say I would have gone to work, I loved the people I worked with, and I would have gone to work whether I was paid or not. I really, really enjoyed it. But it was 1990, and it was the time when early retirement was being offered to people who were over 50. And this is when I had what I called my deathbed scenario. If you were lying on your deathbed now, would you regret not having given the poems a real chance, a real go? And the answer came back really loud and clear, yes. You've always wanted to perform. You've always wanted to do this. Do it now. So I took early retirement, and I'd been talking to a friend about this deathbed scenario, and she said, why don't you send that to Good Housekeeping? So other people have these ideas. I don't have them of my own. So I said, okay, I'll send it to Good Housekeeping. So anyway, they wrote back and said, yes, they would be interested. And a lovely person came to interview me. 2 men, photographers, arrived to take this one photograph, which we spent the whole of one afternoon walking around Warwick, looking for the right situation with this photograph, which was beautiful. It really was. And they put some little snippets of poems in the article. And I did ask them if they would write, that I did do after dinner speaking, because still no email, no website, you know, nothing like that. And I had 600 letters after that. So, you know, and I just found I loved this after dinner speaking, but mostly to ladies who lunch. It was the ladies who lunch that really kind of spurred me on in a way. Because
maybe after lunch, people aren't quite so somnolent as after a dinner speech, so you could have got a better audience.
Oh, yes, I could make them laugh and I could make them cry after drinking.
And Pauline, did you just read, or did you talk about the process of writing as well? Did you give a speech, or did you just read your poems?
I talked about what brought the poems on, yes, but not actually how to write. I don't talk about that, how to write it, but I gave a background
to a particular poem.
Yes, each poem had a little background.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And one of the places I was asked to speak actually was, I think in those days it was called the National Housewives Register, but which is now the National Women's Register. At a conference that they had in, I can't remember whether it was Nottingham University or Leicester University.
Well, maybe there's somebody out there listening to us now who invited you.
There may be. And I was the closing speaker, and so we did have a good laugh. And there was a woman in the audience there called Jane Streeter, who had just
started. There tonight.
She might be there. She's become a great friend because she had just started an independent bookshop in Loudon in Nottinghamshire, and she wrote to me and said she would like to start doing some events. Would I like to be her first event? So I went to the bookshop and I did a poetry reading for her, and subsequently she started the Loudon Book Week Festival and invited me. I think I've been there 7 times, and in 2019 it was the 20th anniversary. And I was fortunate enough that they invited me to go to that. So it was a real celebration. So that sort of started me a little bit on the festival scene. And so I started doing a few festivals. And I should perhaps just at this point say the thing about it was that, you know, if I had been an actress, I would have had the playwright, I would have had other members of the cast, the director, the lighting, the set, the costumes, to blame if it all went wrong. But when you're writing your own poems and you're standing up, it's a bit like it's kind of like a stand-up in a way. And there's nobody to blame.
But on the other hand, you're much more portable. You know,
Oh, very.
people can just ask for Pauline and that's all they need. They don't have to find a fee for the entire company and get an audience for them and so on. So,
no, that's right. That's right. I just wondered if I should read a couple of poems at this point.
Go right ahead. That would be lovely.
Would you like me to? Right.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to read you. I've written a lot of poems about aging. So I thought I'd read this aging one. Don't think. Oh, I will put those on actually. It's a poem about being forgetful. And I started to write this poem and the poem got longer and longer and longer. So in the end, I had to divide it up into Amnesia 1, Amnesia 2, and Amnesia 3. Amnesia 1. At the top of the stairs is the chair where I sit when I can't remember what I've come up to get. I know it's no use sitting there. I'd have to go back to exactly where I was when I thought about going to get whatever it is that I've forgot. Amnesia 2. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. I put shirts onto hangers, gather clothes for a wash, and take them downstairs. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. It started to rain, the windows are open, those flowers are fading. I take them downstairs. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. On the bedroom chair is yesterday's paper, the unfinished crossword, 10 down, 7 letters, something M, something E, and I can't remember the word for loss of memory. Amnesia 3. I have to write everything down now, make notes in my diary, then make a note saying, look in your diary. I make lists, lists of lists, lists saying, make a list, daily organising list. 1, bank, take out £50. 2, buy a card for Rose. 3, PO, stamps and post. I forget the list, go straight to the PO, do not have come for, go back home. If I'm just going for one thing, say a Battenberg cake, I don't make a list. But that's a mistake. I see ripening peaches, fancy a few grapes, wonder if I'm out of bleach, am tempted by the fillet steak, leave the shop with a carrier full, no cake. I keep pens and paper by my bed for when I can't sleep. Last night, I scribbled 1 crackers. But are they for Christmas? For cheese? Or is it someone I know? If ever I find I've written 1 get up, I'll give up. And I thought I'd read one for women, and I thought I'd got it well sorted. I have. I don't often read this one, but because we're all women together, and I'm sure, like me, you all rejoice and have great joy in your women friends. I think women are more fortunate in that maybe than men. I don't know. A lot of men I know don't seem to have that many friends, but I don't know whether it's because we share, the biological, the giving birth. We've got a lot of stories to share with common experiences together. So this is called The Company of Women. Something comforts in the company of women, earthed in the sharing of our mothers. Daughters born in pain to bear again the cycles of the moon's swell of tidal water at the flood. The shed of blood, motherhood, forever bound in the guilt of not being good enough, but wanting more. We give permission, unroll each other's grief, soften the pain, hold the broken bone.
Thank you, Pauline. You're going to read us another now or later?
No, I'll read another one later.
Okay. One of the things about this collection, Be an Angel, where Pauline put together the poems about women, is that it goes through the cycles of life, and there are some about being a very young woman and getting used to, having a partner, and there are some about having very small children, and there's some about having teenage children, and then we go on and on and on until you get to amnesia level, basically,
and then death, and then death.
Yes. So it's a life cycle thing, and of course an awful lot of those life cycle things apply to men as well.
Yes.
And there's one or two very, very charming ones about your own children. I don't know your children, but you can just feel the knowingness in them. There's one that I really, really laughed out loud at. It was about her son being ashamed of how she looked when she came in from the snow. And, you've never been to the record shop looking like that, have you? And then she remembers, all the things she's had to put up with her. I should have warned you that I was going to talk about these particular poems, Pauline, but I didn't actually know. So if you can find it easily, you can read that one. It's one of my favorites.
Okay, I've got a copy of it with me.
Coming in from the snow, isn't it?
You want me to read this?
Why don't you read that one now? Yes.
Okay. I've got that. Sure, I've got that somewhere.
But it's in waiting. It's in.
Yes, it's in here. I'll just.
Okay.
I put the book away. Coming in from the snow. Where are we? Yes, here we go. Page 23. Right. Yes. I should explain that I had been shopping. Our house backed onto a park, and you walked through the park and into Coventry, and I'd been shopping, and it had been snowing, and I came in, and as I came in to the kitchen, my son was just kind of leaning against the sink. It is a bit old-fashioned in the clothes that we describe, but anyway, it was written a long time ago.
Well, probably a lot of us listening to you remember a long time ago.
When I came in from the snow across the park out of town, you stared at me, standing, blue wellies, green parka, red woolly hat. You stared at my carrier bag, HMV records. You've never been into HMV looking like that. You might have been seen by one of my friends. And I was with you. Black Crombie, Doc Martens, close shaved head. I walked beside your jeans, more holes than patches. At your grandfather's 70th birthday party, for all the relations, I danced with you and your feather earring. So I was glad you were there when I came in from the snow. It's what I call one of my revenge poems.
Okay, we're now going to move on to how on earth did you land up on North Uist?
North Uist, yes, I know. Well, it wasn't intentional originally.
You got there by accident.
No, we came on holiday. We've had lots of holidays in Scotland. I love Scotland. We came on holiday in 1997. We'd taken a cottage for 3 weeks, and we brought our bikes, and we had a wonderful time. And at the end of 2 weeks, we looked at each other and said, we could live here. And I had been brought up in Hull, and then of course I'd lived in the Midlands for most of my life, and had been desperate to get back to the sea. So we looked, in the 3rd week we were here, we looked for a house, and this house was about the only one that was in any kind of state that you could have, lived in. So we put in a bid and bought it, but it took us a year to buy it. because of all the crofting laws, the crofting commission, there are all kinds, a little bit of the land hadn't been decrofted and had to be decrofted. It took ages. Anyway, so we moved here in 1998, and we did say that we would come for a 5-year adventure, and if either of us wanted to move back, we would move back. And it was lucky that we didn't want to, actually, because in the 5 years that we were here, there was this housing boom, and we'd sold this house in Warwick, which was a lovely house, and we couldn't have afforded to buy it back by the time the 5 years was up, but it didn't matter because we didn't have to.
But presumably that was the end of the ladies' lunch.
That was definitely the end of ladies' lunch. There's no, yes, the effect on my actual readings, you know, it was pretty drastic, and I did miss it. I was still going backwards and forwards to England to do poetry readings, but you know, there's a limit to the number of times you want to be moving backwards and forwards when you've actually moved here. So it was drastic for the performances, but it's actually completely not exactly changed. I've always written about women, but I began to write about the landscape, which I had no intention of doing. Didn't think I would ever write about the landscape, but slowly the scribbling in my notebook as I was walking just turned to be writing. I was writing about the sea and the shore and the dunes and the view, and you know, the life on the island. So
I'm going to pause for a moment and just look behind Pauline's head. You can see there's a few of her paintings. Tell us how that connected, Pauline.
Oh, right. You want to go on to that one?
We're just, yeah, just because it's sort of come up that you're looking around you and writing. How did it come that you were painting?
Right. Well, yes, because I was wanting to write about the landscape, I just thought I ought to. Again, we come back to this, the word language. Every art and every form has its own language, its own jargon, and I wanted to learn a bit more about sort of drawing and painting, and find a language and perhaps a different way of looking. I think if you're going to paint something, it helps you to perhaps look in a different way. And it was very fortunate. We had this wonderful arts centre and museum called Tai Cursivor, and I think it was about 2004. They started an art course, which started with a diploma, and then the next year there was a diploma and an HNC, and the next year there was a degree. They started a degree. Now you can do a 4-year degree with the Highlands and Islands, University of the Highlands and Islands, actually at Tai Cursivor. So I embarked on the diploma, just doing the drawing and painting elements. I didn't want to do the history of art or the photography or the printmaking, because I wanted to carry on writing. I didn't want to give everything to the art. So I just did the drawing and painting. So I did drawing and painting in the diploma, drawing and painting in the HNC, drawing and painting in the first year of the degree, but then I couldn't do any more because I couldn't go on to the second year. But by then I'd found really how I wanted to paint. I'd inherited a little shed, which was from my husband, who was building himself a very big, brand new shed. So I had my little painting shed at the bottom of the garden, which probably has the most heavenly view. And I started painting. And then again, I didn't think people would buy the paintings, but we started at Tai Cursivor, we started having a thing called Art on the Map, which is like open studios every summer. We just had it for about 3 weeks, and 4 or 5 of us got together and took the community hall, which had just been beautifully redecorated and refurbished completely, and held an exhibition there for 3 weeks in the summer. And I just started to sell my paintings. I think people who come on holiday here, they want to take something of the island back with them.
And a landscape is what they want to take, because that's what they love about it.
And that's, yes, and I think I was quite fortunate because a lot of the artists who live here have got fed up of painting the landscape. You know, they're wanting to move on and do things in a completely different direction, and people were still looking for something that they just reminded them of a particular beach or whatever. So that's how it all began.
We're slightly running out of time, which is why I jumped onto your art. But
Right.
I just want to ask one more question before we open it up to other questions. Is that you've, although you're not Scots, by living in the islands of Scotland, you've sort of become an adopted Scot, haven't you? And you've now got a sort of a life as a Scots poet.
Yeah, well, yes, I have. Scotland is great. It has a live literature scheme which will pay for its poets to. They'll pay half the fee and all the travel expenses for you to go to different places to read. And I run a monthly poetry evenings here, which I've been doing for about 20 years, and I run a writing group as well. And it means we can have poets coming here, which is a lot of money to get them here. But using the live literature scheme, it doesn't cost us as much. You know, it's quite cheap. So yes, and I've done quite a lot of readings in Scotland now. And been recognised.
Would you just say something about that quickly?
Oh, right. Yes. I discovered the world of poetry pamphlets, which were kind of looked down on in England, but they were flourishing in Scotland. It's very popular. And I had wanted to write...
A pamphlet being a very short book. It's just a small collection of poems.
A small collection, yes. There's the small collection of poems. Oops, oh, there's the book falling out. Which is I'd been on a bookmaking course, and I made this pamphlet. It's handmade and hand stitched, and it's got lots of sort of lines. I don't know whether you can see any of that along the bottom.
Yeah,
there's a bit of drawing in it, and I entered it for the Callum MacDonald Award, which is the pamphlet prize in Scotland, and much to my surprise, I won it, which just meant that a lot of people then knew my name. So that was... Well,
it's been, I mean, you're very modest, but it is a life filled with delightful surprises at having your work recognised. And yeah. Thank goodness that's been the case, that we have been able to find it. And people, and now you have a website, so anybody after this talk can go and have a look on the website and order a copy of any of the books. Yeah.
And there are a lot of poems there to be read if you want to, you know, just to read them. Yes. There's a whole load of poems on the website to read.
Well, thank you very much, Pauline. It's been delightful. And I think we're now opening up for questions. And I think in order to see the questions, I need to, does your sister live in one of the islands, says Robin?
Does my sister?
Yes.
No.
The islands, no.
I only have one sister. And she lives in Nottinghamshire.
Okay. And you have one of your children is on the island, and the others are they far away?
One lives in Falkirk, so halfway, and the other one lives in near Melton Mowbray.
Okay.
My daughter lives in Melton Mowbray.
Okay. Any more questions coming up? Oh God, do I understand that there are 47 questions out there?
Oh,
good
right.
Heavens. I would like to have heard more poetry, says somebody, and a bit more about the process of writing. Now that's perhaps says a little about the process of writing.
The process of writing, right? Well, I mean, I just get an idea, and I scribble it by hand, always by hand, usually in a little notebook that I carry with me wherever I go, and I like the idea of it coming down from my head, down my arm, onto the paper with a pen or pencil. And when I get it to a certain stage, then I transfer it to my computer, and then I start fiddling, because I love the whole arrangement of the poem on the page, and the white space, and the line breaks and everything. So,
it's a visual thing as well.
Yes, but
looking at these, there's no way we're going to take all these questions, but several people are asking for more poems.
Oh, right. Shall I read some more poems?
Please.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, right.
I think for the rest of you, I'm so sorry we can't take all the questions, but some of them are asking about what's on the website. That there are paintings on the website, there are poems on the website.
People I think I was at the conference, it says here.
Yes.
From Hilda.
Folk, yes. Can Pauline show her books, please? Well, you can actually have a look at them on the website.
Yes, they're on the website. There they are. I'll just read one, shall I? From the.
Please read another one. Yes.
I hope you will come to Loudon Book Festival. I've been 7 times. I'd just like to read this one because I think it's quite a COVID-y kind of poem.
Yes.
And it's a thankful poem, really. It's called On Those Days. On those days when we wake to the sun edging in, when we wake to the silence of no wind, when we amble half-moon beaches, apples in our pockets, when we sit small on headland rocks, watching the sea. On those days, if this is all there is, it is enough.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We do have time for a few more. Shall we
right.
I'm going to just scoot through seeing there's any other mostly people are saying that
can I read Eve? Can I read Eve? Right, I'll read Eve.
Lots of people seem to have seen you before somewhere, Pauline.
Yes, how lovely.
It was all those ladies who were lunching.
I know. I know. It's wonderful. I wish I could touch everybody.
Okay. So just pause on the messages for a moment, everybody. Let's just all listen.
This one is about Eve, who I feel had such a bad press. And if only there had been more women when the Bible was being written, maybe she wouldn't have got the blame, and maybe we wouldn't have had this history of guilt.
Well, of course, there were more women. They just didn't get to write.
Yes. I've got 2 poems about Eve. This is the first one. We hadn't seen him for weeks. I'd just sprinkled incense into the hot pool, was lying there in starlight, sipping iced nectar, listening to the nightingales. He appeared out of nowhere, in complete meltdown, bellowing my name. I stood my ground without a towel. It was only an apple, for God's sake, and I only took 1 bite. Get over it. He crept away, and I stepped back into the pool. It was a fundamental moment. And this one I wrote, it's not actually in the book, although it appears to be because it's stuck in. I don't know when this one's going to get published, but I wrote this when I got so angry about the abortion rights in America, what was happening. And I'm sorry about the swearing. It's called Genesis. Look, I'm sorry about that fucking apple. I was just newly made, had no role models, didn't think beyond the bite. And God, were we bitten, inferior, a possession, beaten into submission, when all along it should have been obvious. A sperm is not superior to an egg. And the wombs belong to us.
Thank you, Pauline. I think what I would like to suggest is that anybody who wants to ask Pauline more questions, emails her. You're going to get a flood of emails, Pauline, but I think it is just have a thought, everybody out there, for what it's like for Pauline sitting here. She can't see you. We know there are about 300 of you out there, which is a fantastic feeling. She says it might be her biggest audience ever. But it would be, but somebody sharing her life like that, sharing her thoughts like that, would love to make it mutual. So if you've got things to say back to her, please send them to her.
Yes, please do. I'd love it. And if you want to invite me to come and read somewhere, I'm very happy to do that.
When you can move again.
I'm just butting in.
Sorry? Somebody's saying something, I can't hear.
It's me, it's Natalie. I'm just butting in because I'm just thinking maybe we could do an article in the newsletter or magazine answering some of the questions.
That would be lovely. Can you collect up the questions from the chat function?
So if everyone wants to either put them on the chat now or email them to me, then I can liaise with Pauline and Marion and get that.
That's more efficient. Yeah. So Pauline, there's a newsletter, the National Women's Register newsletter, and Natalie's suggesting we can collect up some of the questions. You know, if 7 of the questions are the same thing, we can sort of coordinate them and make it, and you can get you to answer the questions in the newsletter. That would be lovely.
Yes, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And buy her books, people. There's a lot of pleasure waiting for you there. And they are, you know, I've given them to my daughter, obviously a different generation. She writes the occasional poem herself. She doesn't put them about. She writes it for herself. But she said to me the other day, I'd made a small collection of poems, and one of Pauline's is part of it. And there were poems there from all sorts of prize-winning poets. And she read it all and she said, it's a lovely selection. But for me, the one that really works is Pauline's. She's just got that way of being straightforward and ordinary and perfect. Thank you, Pauline.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.